Hello, and welcome back to Biodiversity Impact, a podcast exploring the journeys of scientists, sustainability experts, entrepreneurs, creators, and others who are working towards a more nature-positive future for people, planet, and profit. I'm your host, Bez, and today I'm very excited to be outside of the podcast studio in a very special place indeed. We're currently at Danam Valley, a conservation area and field station surrounded by primary pristine tropical rainforest in Sabah, Malaysian Borneo. You might be hearing some cicadas and frogs and birds in the background during this interview. Today I'll be interviewing Dr. Caroline Dingle. Caroline is an evolutionary ecologist interested in the processes that create and maintain biodiversity, and she's been working in this field for the past 20 years. She now coordinates the Bachelor of Environment and Society degree at Capilano University in Vancouver, Canada. Caroline, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Such a pleasure to chat with you today. Thank you for joining. So, what do you do as an evolutionary ecologist? And can you tell us a bit about your background and what brought you into this field?
Yeah, so the main kind of questions I'm interested in is how the environment shapes different species, how they adapt, and how changes in the environment might drive differentiation between different populations of species. Ultimately, maybe even making new species appear. My background, I knew in high school I wanted to do something environmental. I thought I was going to be an environmental activist, but at some point I thought maybe people would listen to me more if I had a PhD. I'm not sure if it's true. But I was always interested in the rainforest in particular. That was a big issue at that time. Saving the rainforest was the big issue. And I remember thinking, I remember my mom gave me a copy of that book Diversity of Life by E.O. Wilson. And on the back cover, there was a picture of E.O. Wilson in the rainforest, like standing with his hand up on a vine, looking very colonial, I guess. Uh-huh. And I remember thinking how cool, but it never crossed my mind that I could do that myself. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't until I was in college and I met a postdoc. She was a female tropical biologist, and she was studying arboreal kangaroos, climbed trees, and told us all these stories. Uh-huh. And I thought, I don't know if I could do that. But I did. It showed me that there is a pathway into tropical biology for someone like me. So I started, most of my first research was in South America and the Amazon. And I've since worked in the Amazon, in Australia, in Asia, and now I am currently back in Canada.
Mm-hmm. So you've worked in tropical ecosystems around the world. Across all the tropical ecosystems you've worked in, what are the main differences and what are the main similarities you've observed?
We were just talking the other day about one thing I noticed walking around. Well, here in Danam, the canopy is much taller. And I thought it was already pretty big when I was in the Amazon, but here you have the canopy is taller. And I've also noticed the understory seems much, at least in the Amazon, you get a lot more vines than you see here. I don't actually know what the reason for that is. But otherwise, some of the key environmental factors are very similar. It's obviously high temperatures, constant year-round, humidity, high amounts of rainfall pretty consistently through the year. So you see a lot of interesting things. Working in temperate zones, I work a lot on birds, and in temperate zones you have strong seasonality, so there's a strong breeding season in the spring. This time of year, back at home, all the birds are madly building nests and singing to each other. And sometimes some birds here in Danam will have breeding seasons, but also there are many things that are active and kind of breeding, defending territories year-round. So that's a big difference between tropical forests and temperate forests back home. Mm-hmm. I mostly work on birds. So when I was working in the Amazon, I was working on a little brown species of birds that live in the understory that you never see. Uh-huh. But they have beautiful songs, and they actually duet. The males and the females sing one. It sounds like one song, but it's actually the male and the female alternating different parts. So that was fun. And so we were looking at that behavior, but also trying to understand how the environment was shaping those songs and how difference in songs between different populations might actually be driving them to become different species. Here in Danam, I've been working on species that are part of the wildlife trade. They're traded for various reasons. I work on a songbird here, the oriental magpie robin that's popular for songbird trade. And I've been working on the helmeted hornbills, which are also traded, but for the solid keratin in their casque. So unfortunately, these big, beautiful birds that we hear more often than we see here are often hunted for very tiny amounts of keratin in their bills that can be carved similar to ivory. So I've been mostly working in the lab on these things, so using genetics to try to understand geographic variation in genetics, so we could identify, if we look at the DNA from one species, we could figure out where within its range it comes from. And this would help enforcement agencies to understand trade routes and maybe focus their enforcement efforts to try to slow down the illegal trade of many of these species.
And you, in terms of collecting data, you've mentioned genetic data and you've mentioned you listen to the birds' songs. What are the tools you use to collect data on birds?
So I have used before passive acoustic monitoring equipment, which is really increased in the last decade. These are recorders you can put out in the field, and they record 24 hours a day, so much longer than I can spend in the field. So we were using those. They can be used to detect presence of birds, to record the bird songs and look at, what I'm interested in is how bird song changes in different environments so the birds can communicate efficiently. For the genetics, we use a variety of sources where a lot of these species, especially if they're endangered, it's very hard to find samples from live individuals. So often we're working with confiscated individuals, either confiscated live birds or parts of animals that have been traded, and we can extract DNA from different sources as well. So this kind of work is nice because it involves a lot of collaboration. We work a lot with people in the areas where the birds are found. That's essential to this kind of work. But we also have good collaborations with governments and with NGOs that can help take our data and put it into policy and actual action for conservation.
And working in this field of evolutionary ecology can be both inspiring and demanding. What keeps you motivated in this space?
I think that the main motivation is really the animals themselves. Right? Sometimes when you feel frustrated and things aren't working out the way you hope, you just remember you're doing it for a good cause, right? You remember, especially when you come out of a place like this, and you remember hearing the helmeted hornbill as it sang in the top of a 100-meter tall tree, or seeing these birds that are pretty rare in the wild, seeing them singing here, and you think, okay, I've got to keep going for that work. As we were talking about before, we do it to save the world, right? We're going to do it one species at a time.
One species at a time, and getting knowledge of these species builds that case to save and protect and conserve biodiversity.
Yes, of course. Yeah, we can't do very much without understanding these species, and it's amazing. The birds, probably half the things you look at around here we know almost nothing about.
That always blows my mind.
Yeah. We don't know what their nesting is. We don't know any of their habits, their needs. And we have to have that information in order to move forward with any kind of conservation efforts. The helmeted hornbill is a good example because they live 100 meters up in trees. Their nests are in tree holes 50 or 60 meters up. They never come down to the ground. And they live in forests like this, pristine forests. They're not in secondary forests, so you have to really get deep into the forest to see them. And that makes it extremely challenging to get any of that basic natural history data that we need to. We don't even actually have an accurate count of how many of them there are left.
Yeah, that's wild.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
And they're listed as critically endangered, but that's based mostly on the volume of birds that we see in the trade, not actually based on
Is that
an estimate of the numbers that we see in the wild.
Okay. And the life history of, for example, the helmeted hornbill is quite complicated, and if there's any disturbance, then it could really cause a crash in their population.
Yes. So some of the work that we've done with my PhD student in the past is looking at, so again, using just the data we can get from the casques or their beaks that are in trade. With that DNA, we could identify whether they're from a male bird or female bird. So we could actually calculate the number of males and females that are being poached. Unfortunately for the species, both male and females have that casque, so they both get poached. But we did find it wasn't significant, but we had a higher number of males in the trade. So one of the consequences for that potentially is if you have a skewed sex ratio, so if you're removing more males, these birds mate for life, or at least they have long-term pair bonds. And if their mate goes missing, we don't know if they ever mate again. So if you have a low number of males, it just reduces the number of potential new birds that are going to be recruited into the population. And also, because the females spend half of a year holed up in a hole with her chicks, and totally reliant on the male during that time. So if a male is poached while the female and the chicks are holed up in the nest, they will also die from that as well. So trying to understand, and we don't have the dates on when those things were actually poached, but the implications are much higher than the numbers that we're coming through.
Yeah. Of course, no journey is without its obstacles. What are some of the key challenges you faced during your work?
So many. Everything from personal challenges all the way up to just logistics, right? I mean, the places where we work out in the tropics, they're not easy to get to.
No.
Although they're easier now than they were 20 years ago.
Yeah.
When I was in the field 20 years ago, there was no internet, there's no cell phones, you were really off the grid. So things are a little easier now, but still, they're far to get to. The conditions are challenging. It's humid, it's hot, muddy. There's dangerous animals out there.
We've actually not been able to go into the forest the past 2 days, is it? Because
3 days, I think.
3 days, because we have some elephants around.
So there's things like that. Like I mentioned earlier, just sometimes trying to see the animals that you're trying to study. If they're endangered, there may not be many of them, or their life history means they're hard to find. That's a challenge. And also it's hard to be away for a long time. This was much easier when I was younger.
Yeah.
I would go away, disappear for a year into the field, and that was fine. But now, with that family and things, it's a little harder to take the time. So there's some personal aspects to it as well. But luckily my family is very understanding. They know this is important
Supportive
to me.
Family.
And they like they also want to see these things get conserved, so they're supportive. So that's very important. Sure.
That's fantastic. Looking ahead, Caroline, what are your thoughts on the future of biodiversity conservation? Is there anything that gives you hope, and do you think there's anything we should be paying particular attention to?
I'm an optimistic person by nature, so I always have hope. Of course, there's lots of reasons to have concerns globally. But I think for me, one of the things I've focused on is trying to bring as many people along my journey as possible, getting people interested and excited about biodiversity and really understanding what it means. For the average person, maybe biodiversity is not something that they've thought much about. They like to see birds in their neighborhood or the flowers in their garden, but they haven't necessarily thought as much as we as biologists have about why that's really valuable. So I think education definitely plays a key role. I'm primarily a teacher now at a teaching university, and that gives me a lot of hope when I see the new generation of students coming through, and they're excited and they have a lot of energy. And they're thinking about things in ways that are so different than what I think about, right? And I think that, our methods, I think we've been doing some good work, but I think we'll make big improvements in our ability to do conservation with more innovative methods. So I think seeing young people coming through and thinking about technology. There's currently a drone flying over our heads, some filming in the area, but people are using drones to collect biodiversity data and thinking about ways to access parts of the world that we can't so easily, or thinking about how they might use economic tools to conserve biodiversity, or really even art and any different ways. So I think that's exciting to me, and I think still very important. And as we've talked about before, I think there is a lot of data out there. I think we still need to collect data, but we also need to find ways for that data to be made available and useful to people, a larger pool of people, because even though I also feel like there's a lot of conservation biologists, really we're a small number compared to the number of people in the world. And if we can find ways for people in different sectors to access that data and use it in a way that's useful for biodiversity conservation, sustainability in lots of different ways, I think we really just increase our power. So I think that's a place that we could be paying a lot of attention to, is thinking about how we translate biodiversity data. And I work a lot with genomics, so really thinking about genomic data, which is even another layer hidden from people.
Yeah.
You need really specialized training to be able to take that data and do something with it. But if we can find a way to make that data accessible to people, provide more people with training, ability to not only to use the data, but even to know what data is there and how it might be used and how it's, what different applications there are. I think there's a lot of potential there to really increase the power of that data to do something for good.
And as an educator, do you think there might be new degree paths opening up, since we are having this biodiversity data deluge with the new technologies? We're getting so much more biodiversity data. Do you think there might be new sort of pathways that undergraduates can take to maybe train as biodiversity data scientists?
Yeah, I can imagine this in lots of different ways, but we already see some sort of big data degrees starting to come out. People that are trained in the programming tools and analytical. It's a little bit different than math. I think sometimes my students don't want to do it because I think it's math, but it's a different thing. It's about learning how to design programs that can do some of these complicated analyses in a capacity better than our own brains can. Yeah, so I think training in those kind of analytical tools, computer programming. We've been talking about having a micro-credential in genomics for biodiversity. So really, bioinformatics is a huge area, which basically just means how do we take this huge amount of data, whether it's genomic data or diversity data of other sorts, and answer some questions with it. And really, it's a lot of computer programming. But I don't think that's enough, right? I think computer programming combined with a solid knowledge of science, and then always coming back to, you need that natural history data to understand what it is that you're analyzing. Genetics has a lot of potential, but it's not enough on its own. And honestly, I think training in just how to store and manage those big databases is also really important. It's you have to keep that data so well organized for it to be useful.
And making it open access as well. I've heard that there's this problem that exists in science called the file drawer problem, where scientists do actually quite impressive amounts of data collection, but if they don't end up publishing it because it doesn't seem significant at the time, or they don't get around to it, that data stays locked up in their file drawers, or now probably their hard disks on their computers. We don't really see that data, and it's not made openly available.
Yes, that data. And also people have actual physical specimens that they've collected with all the proper permits and for studies. Maybe they used the bit that they needed, and those specimens are stored in freezers, and we don't even have good records of where all those things are. So I think there's a lot of efforts to try to find a way to centralize all that data, or at least provide a map to where all that data could be found. I've been involved with a group of people recently that were talking about different ways to try to do this, including developing a network of who's doing what, just having a list of people who are working on bats and plants and fungi. So if you wanted that data, you could email them and say, do you happen to have this? You could find all of that information yourself on the internet, but it would take you ages. So some kind of centralized database. But then even going as far forward as thinking about a facility where people could send specimens that they're done with, and essentially a museum, right?
Essentially a natural history collection. Yes, exactly.
Yes, but I agree that there's a lot of information and data that are already out there. And it's, again, coming back to, someone told to me once, because sometimes, as scientists, we also struggle to get all this stuff published, right? This is why we have the file drawer problem. There's not enough time, or maybe it wasn't as significant as we had hoped. But it all comes back to those animals again. And someone told me once, we have a duty to those animals to publish that data and make it available, because they provided that information to us.
Yes.
And we owe it to them to use it to help in their survival.
Yes. It's a nice way of being motivated to then take that extra step and make it open access and available online.
Yeah, definitely.
What's been your favourite thing to see this week at Danham Valley?
The helmets at Hornbill, for sure.
Yeah.
I've been here. So normally I like to, when I work on a project, I usually do the field work and then we go back to the lab and do the genetics work. But for this particular species, we've mostly just been working in the lab. And I have been trying for 3 years to actually see this bird in person. So I had 2 very beautiful views of helmets at hornbills on this trip, and it just made me very happy.
Congratulations for finally seeing your study species. Well, Caroline, thank you so much for joining me today on the Biodiversity Impact podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Thank you. I really hope you found today's conversation interesting, inspiring, and insightful. If you like the podcast, please do subscribe on Spotify, Amazon Music, YouTube, or any other place you get your podcasts. Thanks again for listening, and I'll catch you in the next one.